Gangs destroy communities, just like their bullets destroy people.
Child warriors, communities under siege, and a look at the origins of one of America's most notorious street gangs.
Well, you had your leader over all leaders, which was Raymond Washington.
Next, on Lords of the Mafia.
Hey, right. Man, yep.
August 1979. A 29-year-old man is called to a car by someone he apparently knows. Moments later, a shotgun rips a hole in his chest, and he is left to die. Had this crime occurred even a few years earlier, it would have merited front-page headlines. But by 1979, gang-related homicides were averaging almost one murder every 32 hours. What the press apparently did not realize at the time was that the victim, Raymond Lee Washington, was a founder of the notorious street gang called the Crips. Once a handful of teenagers dedicated to protecting their turf, by the 1990s, Crips numbered in the tens of thousands and had expanded their criminal influence to wreak havoc throughout the United States. The story of the Crips begins in the early 1940s, when the explosion of wartime industry triggered a major migration of workers from the South. By 1944, the black population of Los Angeles had more than doubled. Anti-minority covenants and whites-only deed provisions in place since the 1920s kept blacks from living outside of carefully prescribed regions. Overcrowding was severe. The first public housing projects erected in Watts were in part an attempt to alleviate the problem, but as the population continued to expand, pressure mounted on surrounding white communities to change their practices. That pressure often erupted in violence. Blacks who ventured across the unmarked border were often attacked by teenage members of a new gang called the Spook Hunters, one of a handful of white gangs active at this time. It was only natural for LA's newest residents to respond in kind. It was into this environment that a young Raymond Lee Washington and his family arrived from Texas. Born in 1953, Raymond soon hooked up with the Avenues, one of many gangs active at the time.
In the 60s, we had the Slawsons, the Gladiators, the Businessmen, the Rebel Routes, and basically, back then, it wasn't, not real violent,
Greg Batman Davis would eventually become a founding member of the Crips and is one of the few still alive today. For the first time on television, his exclusive interview reveals the genesis of the gang from its inception and provides a first-hand portrait of the modern gang world. Batman has long since retired from the gangbanger lifestyle, but in the early 1960s he was a fledgling member of the Businessmen and engaged in the battles of the day.
You might have a gang fight, you might see bumper jacks sometimes, you might see chains, you might see a knife, but it wasn't basically, you get in a gun and kill somebody,
The fights during that time period usually emerged over something such as a girlfriend. Some of the blacks that lived in the east side started to break out of the central Vernon ghetto and move on the west side, which was considered a more affluent area at that time. There was sort of this economic disparity between blacks who were able to move on the west side and blacks that weren't. So then you start to see this conflict expanding in numbers and in turfs. And I believe in 1960 there were about 6 homicides, which was considered a lot during that time period.
Back then they had zip guns and stuff like that, but at that time I was still kind of young. Didn't nobody want to show me how to make no zip gun, so I had to figure it out. I made a 38 zip gun. I made a 410 zip gun. Like I say, back then it wasn't too much, about no gun, because everybody was believing in fighting.
It soon became clear that South Central was in a decline. The post-war economic boom was over. Factories closed or relocated. And while a 1954 Supreme Court ruling against segregation had opened schools and other services to black families, the ruling had unintended consequences.
after the 1954 Supreme Court ruling, the housing opened up, schooling opened up, so on. So a lot of middle-class people from the inner city were able to move out. And with them, they took their middle-class organizations, their middle-class organizing capacities and so on, leaving in the inner city those who were less capable of doing those things. And the gap has been filled in part by the emergence of street gangs.
Dr. Malcolm Klein has studied gang issues for close to 40 years. He recently retired as a director of the Social Science Research Institute at the University of Southern California. His book, The American Street Gang, challenges assumptions made by media and law enforcement about gangs and how best to control them.
When I started in 1962, there were about 50 cities across the country, cities or suburbs of large cities, that had a gang problem of some sort. By 1970, that had doubled. By 1980, it had doubled it again. And then in the mid-80s and the 90s, it's just exploded. The most recent national survey done by the National Youth Gang Center lists about 4,000 jurisdictions, cities to small towns and rural areas, that have a gang problem. That's just an enormous explosion of this problem.
By 1965, the seeds of that future had already been planted. On August 11th, California Highway Patrol arrested a South Central motorist for drunk driving. What started as a minor skirmish exploded into 6 days of full-scale rebellion that came to be known as the Watts Riots. There is no evidence to suggest young Raymond participated in the violence, but it is almost certain he witnessed the chaos.
We had our hands on some of the major black gangs in the area at the time, and they didn't get involved in the Watts riots until the third day, or the third night, in fact. And by and large, their involvement was going down and watching the scene.
In the end, 4 people were dead. Another 1,000 had been injured. A special governor's commission later identified major causes for the rebellion as including an absence of job opportunities for blacks and a resentment of the Los Angeles Police Department, then in his 15th year of leadership under Chief William Parker. The commission echoed both the governor and LA's district attorney at the time in criticizing Parker's strong-arm approach to law enforcement, which many South Central residents experienced firsthand.
In the early 60s, LAPD was run by Chief Parker, who was a tremendous reform chief. He took what had been a nationally notoriously corrupt department and turned it around extremely effectively. But it distanced itself from the community. This was especially true in South Central Los Angeles and in East Los Angeles.
As the community started to rebuild, street gangs like the Slossons and the Gladiators all but disappeared. For the next 4 years, gang-related violence was practically non-existent.
Shortly after the Watts Rebellion in 1965, there was a whole bunch of organizations and programs started in Los Angeles by the youths who used to be in these clubs. And one of them was the Black Panther Party, which was originally founded in Oakland. LA started a chapter under a guy named Alprentice Carter, also known as Bunchy. And he was a Slauson member, a club that existed in Los Angeles from the 50s throughout the early 60s. So as he became the president of this chapter, it started to get a lot of youths involved in this new movement.
While most of the U.S. condemned the Black Panthers' revolutionary agenda, their message of community-based independence struck a chord with the residents of South Central. And even though they were too young to join, it is likely Raymond and his cohorts absorbed the Panthers' rhetoric through rallies and outreach programs in the community.
The Black Panthers was pushing brothers to go to school. They was feeding breakfast in the morning. We was having breakfast and stuff. Like I told you, I wanted to be a Panther, but wasn't going down. My mother wouldn't let me be one.
In late November of 1968, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover issued a memo directing his agents to exploit all avenues of creating dissension within the ranks of the Black Panther Party. Hoover's strategy involved counterintelligence measures pitting the Panthers against the US organization, another Black Power movement under the leadership of Ron Karenga, creator of the Kwanzaa celebration. It was relatively easy for the FBI to flame the fires of rhetoric by fabricating documents and political cartoons seemingly generated by each side. These covert efforts helped turn an ongoing philosophical debate into a deadly battle. In January of 1969, Bunchy Carter and John Huggins were gunned down on the UCLA campus allegedly by members of the US organization. Many years later, a retired FBI agent came forward with claims that the Bureau had helped plan the assassination. The demise of the Black Panthers in Los Angeles was said to be yet another blow to a generation of black teenagers who'd witnessed many of their role models assassinated throughout the 1960s.
What I'm saying in so many words, they should have let the Panthers win on because there probably would have never been no Crips or no Bloods.
According to Batman Davis, 15-year-old Raymond Washington decided it was time for his generation to take a stand.
It was 10 guys, and you know, basically everybody lived in the community.
Remember the Panthers, man? Yeah. They was strong, man. Yeah, they was tight, man. They protected the community, man. Yeah. Look around you, man. Who gonna protect ours? But you and I, man, we love our people, man. We love this community. Yeah. Somebody gotta protect it. Look around you, man. We the only ones, man. We the only ones who care. We should start our own thing, man. Yeah. Baby Crips. Baby Crips. Sound good, huh, man? Y'all down, man?
We wore an earring in our left ear. We wore ace deuce hat, beige khakis, suspenders dropped down, a glove on the left hand, black, and we had a cane. That's how people knew who we was.
Cribs weren't thinking in terms of robberies and homicides and fighting. They were more protectors of the neighborhood.
Couldn't nobody come through and snatch no purses, break in no cars, or nothing like that, because it was like a community thing, you know. The guys in the neighborhood protected that neighborhood.
According to one source, the name Crip became Crip because of the gang's unique walk, the use of canes, and their distinctive way of standing with the left foot turned out, all of which led one resident to describe them as Crip, short for crippled. Reportedly, Raymond Washington himself once claimed that Crip referred to the Tales from the Crypt, a popular movie released in the early 70s. One fact everyone seems to agree on is that Raymond Lee Washington was a soft-spoken, charismatic leader intent on building an empire.
Well, you had your leader over all leaders, which was Raymond Washington. A lot of people you can't whoop, okay? You can't whoop them, but you hear people saying, oh, if he was here, I'll do this to him and that and that.
Hit him, yeah, let's go, hit him, Ray, yeah!
9 out of 10, the guys that you hear say that couldn't whoop Raymond no way, because Raymond likes to fight.
Hit him, yeah!
He liked to fight, and you know if you get into something, you can always say, well, I'm going to get Raymond, you know? And when you say a person's name that everybody don't heard, that scares them automatic.
It has been reported that Washington spread the word about his new gang on the walls of South Central, continuing a long tradition of gang graffiti.
Chitty chitty bang bang, that was something everybody that was a Crip used to say, you know, because I used to say it. I used to, you know, you sit up and you make little rhyme, chitty chitty bang bang, number of Crips and things, Crips don't die, Crips multiply. Chitty chitty
Bang, bang, black or white, all the Crips gonna ride tonight. 3 up, 2 down, all the Crips from underground.
We don't jive, we don't joke, we smoke, don't make a big land us go.
It was going to happen. These were gang spawning areas. If Raymond Washington and a few of his buddies hadn't started up a Crip gang, somebody else would have started up a something gang, a 59th Street gang, a Watergate gang, a Democrat gang. God knows what it would have been called, but there would have been gangs in South Central.
By the time you get to 71, 72, they started turning their energies more towards robberies and stealing materials and stealing things because they didn't have any money. The economics during that time was depressing for the youth.
You know, there's a whole lot of stuff came into play for us to go negative against other people's. And I'm not going to say it was all because of property. I'm not going to say that.
First homicides that a Crip member participated in was the stealing of a leather coat, which was initially for trying to fashion themselves after the Panthers.
March 1972. Robert Bilal and his friends were leaving a concert at the Hollywood Palladium when a group of Cribs demanded that they hand over their leather coats. Bilal refused.
And he fell down on the ground and hit the back of his head on the curb. And he eventually died later that day in the hospital.
News of their criminal exploits gave the Crips an instant notoriety that other delinquent youths found attractive. There was power to be found in numbers.
It was extremely popular. In fact, having large numbers, Raymond was able to recruit a lot of people to continue cripping in different neighborhoods.
Like I say, from the beginning, when we first started, it wasn't but 10, okay? It wasn't nothing but the East Side baby Crips. Then you had your East Side Crips, Then came the West Side and Compton Crips. Okay, at that time, things started really changing, man.
By 1972, 8 Crip gangs were thriving in Los Angeles County, boasting a total membership of approximately 200 members. Even though these gangs are only loosely affiliated with Washington's original Crip set, their aggregate size and influence was starting to pose a threat to other gangs also operating in the region.
A Brim, a guy named Fred, was murdered, they believe, by a Crip. And then around 1972, a group in Compton, the Piru Boys, they got into a conflict with the Compton Crips, and they had a meeting on Piru Street, and they organized all these other clubs and groups that weren't Crips to get together and say, you know, what are we going to do about this growing Crip presence and this domination that they're trying to do over the community? And that's when they decided to come up with this new identity, which eventually emerged into the Bloods.
I say about the late part of 72, early part of 73, we started flying them rags. The red was for the Bloods and the blue was for the Crips.
The sergeant used to work this unit was friendly with one of the founders of one of the Piru sets. And when he asked him why, looking for some deep, dark sociological reason in why they had blood, you know, is it for shedding the blood of your enemy or bleeding for your gang? And he said he just looked at him, shook his head and said, remember, we used to have to buy our rags at the liquor store and they only sold 2 colors, red and blue, and they already had blue. And it could have been just simply that.
Wesley McBride is a sergeant in the L.A. Sheriff's Department's Safe Streets Bureau. He is also president of the National Alliance of Gang Investigators Associations, as well as his California branch. He has been following gang trends for over 25 years.
People talk about, well, they didn't get violent until the 80s. Well, I can tell you, I came into this detail in 1972, and it was violent then. The difference is they had junk guns in those days. They didn't have necessarily good guns, sawed-off shotguns and 22s, where now they all have excellent weaponry. The new 9mm or 380 tends to be their favorite weapon, and put a lot of bullets in the air with one of those.
Los Angeles boasts the largest sheriff's department in the nation. Every day, gang enforcement teams deploy into the field. Their work a unique combination of enforcement and prevention.
Probably out of every 100 houses, 99 of them are just families trying to make a living every single day. And each house has, you know, a couple little kids. And it only takes 1 or 2 houses on every block. The kids that turn into gang members and end up becoming the ones that end up terrorizing the whole community.
We like, if you get a youngster who's gangbanger, it's most likely, you know what I'm saying, it's inherited. It's in here before he came.
There's intervention programs. We try to refer kids to community-based organizations, you know, like Little League, church organizations. We try to get in the family. We get these kids when they're young and get them referred to maybe some other type of program. You know, we might keep them out of the gangs, but it's hard. You know, they're growing up in these neighborhoods and being around it. It's almost glamorous to them.
What do you think is going to happen if Carlo or the Crips came through the neighborhood and they're looking for someone to shoot? You standing out, you're looking like that. What's going to happen?
Find shooters. That's about it.
By 1973, gangs were proliferating at an alarming rate, fueled in part by an increasingly deadly rivalry between the Crips and the Bloods. Between 1972 and 1979, the number of gang-related homicides rose from 55 to 276. Washington himself was in prison for much of this time period, incarcerated for second-degree robbery. Without central leadership, the various Crip sets continued to splinter and fragment. These new sets often took names identifying their region of control. Washington's original East Side Crips became the East Coast Crips, with subgroups appending specific street numbers to their name. If a set was large enough to encompass several blocks in a row, they might take the name Rolling 30s, for example, to indicate control of every street between 30th and 39th.
The other thing to understand about Crips, for your viewers, is that there is no Crip gang. There are lots of Crip gangs. Some of them are affiliated with each other and feel an affinity. Some of them don't get along well at all, and there are lots of Crip against Crip violent activities.
When you get to the late 1970s, you start to see these rivalries emerge within the Crips, and these rivalries are now, 20 years old, and they're still here today. One of the biggest Crip rivalries in South LA is between the Rolling 60s Crips and the A-Tray Gangster Crips.
When Raymond Washington finally emerged from prison, he found himself in a world at war with itself. Gone were the traditional fistfights. The new world valued bullets over punches.
Homicide is much more common amongst gang members now than it used to be, and 90 to 95% of those homicides are firearm-caused homicides.
I can go back and remember one night me and him got together, and he didn't know I had a little sawed-off shotgun. And I said, Raymond, I got a shotgun like that, and I pulled it out my pants, and I ain't never seen him that angry.
What are you doing with that?
He was in an uproar. He took the gun, threw the gun in the sewer, and I looked at him. I said, man, why you throw my gun down there, man? What's wrong with you?
We can fight. We can fight.
I said, but, you know, things are starting to change. You know, guys are starting using guns, you know, to handle their business now, because a lot of guys don't want to fight, or a lot of guys can't fight. You know what I'm saying? So after then, I would never tell Raymond that I had a gun. And I say, man, Raymond don't know.
In the old days, if two of us beat up one of you, you and your group could or could not retaliate. It was pretty much an option for you. But if two of us shoot and kill one of yours, the demand character of that situation is such that you are almost bound and determined, somebody in your group, to try and repay that event, to fire back at some point. Maybe not successfully, but the requirement to do so is much greater than it used to be. So the homicide cycles on itself. Didn't used to be the case.
If it was a way that we can run it back to the beginning, and if, like I said, if Raymond was still here, probably a whole lot of this wouldn't be happening the way it's happening, because a lot of guys ain't with that just straight killing somebody, you know, because of what he got or what he said. If I'm not mistaken, he was trying to bring everybody together, back up under one umbrella, and then we was going to talk to the Bloods. Everything was trying to go smooth, then things went haywire after he got killed.
Hey, right. Man, yep.
I know how Raymond was. He used to like always tell us, if somebody called us, don't walk up on the car, you know, make them get out. Whoever they say they was, Raymond said, I know him. And he walked up on the car, and they say when he leaned on the car, he said, y'all ain't something. And from the way I feel, I think somebody on the inside of the organization killed Raymond, because some of the guys was there. I don't know if it was behind power, leadership. I don't know what it was behind.
August 1979. The founder of the Crips lay dying on the streets of Los Angeles, a victim of the same violence he had helped to inspire. In the coming decade, thousands of young men would follow in his footsteps.
Crippin' to me, at its best, is when we was all one big happy family. At the worst is when Crips start killing Crips and killing innocent peoples. Okay? And I don't know, man. It's just, it's real sad. It's just sad. Because something that we put together, supposed to be something for just protect the neighborhood, went sour.
Kids growing up in gang territory understand violence. They are also familiar with death. Why then do gangs continue to attract young members?
Oversimplifying it a bit, family is the number one cause. They let this child be a gang member. Now, sometimes their ability to stop it is limited because of their education, their jobs, both working or no jobs, and poverty-stricken. We found, parents helping the kids sell drugs, because it's putting food on the table, stuff like that.
It starts out with the gang members asking the little kid to, hold some dope or maybe carry a gun for them and do these little errands, and they have to, I guess they earn their stripes. There's more things they do, and before you know it, they're caught up in it.
Kids join gangs by and large for identity, for status, for reputation, for a sense of protection against other gangs. And the crime is a byproduct of a lot of that. It's important. It's a piece of the action. Much more important is hanging around together, socializing, being with each other.
You can get love from the homies because they're going to look out for you. A lot of kids don't get love at home.
In the early 1980s, a new influence arrived in Los Angeles. crack cocaine.
We became aware of crack cocaine in the early 80s, just before the Olympics. We didn't call it crack, we called it rock. The gang members, the early stages, weren't selling it at all. And they got hired kind of as bodyguards and lookouts and stuff for the big-time drug dealers that running it, and slowly took over most of that crack cocaine operations, at least street-level operations in the neighborhoods.
Each gang sort of had a kingpin to them. This person would have the connections to bringing the drugs into the community. He sells it to the street-level dealer in ounces or half ounces or kilos.
And what it really does is suck young kids into the gang. It's a great recruitment tool because the dope dealers have money, cars, guns, girls, and the little dysfunctional kid standing around on the corner has none of that.
The assumption was by many law enforcement officials, both locally and in the federal agencies, that gangs were now in charge of drug sales in inner city America, that they were turning into drug distribution gangs. Our research across the nation suggests that maybe 8 to 10% of all the street gangs are of this specialty type, drug gangs or burglary gangs, robbery gangs, auto theft gangs, gangs that concentrate on a particular form of criminal activity. Law enforcement in some cases, media in many cases, pick out the more dramatic examples of the drug-selling group and say, aha, this is what gangs have become. They're wrong. Some gangs have become that, the majority have not.
Like Raymond Washington before him, Batman was in prison while the world changed. He emerged to find the crack explosion already in progress.
That's when I was introduced to the cocaine. I didn't really know what it was, because at first, when I first went to see my friend, he like, so what you gonna do while you out? I said, I'm just gonna kick it like that. He like, you running with the little homies, get them to rock it up, and they know what to do. They know what to do. You want to make some money? And I'm like, man, make some money, you know? I'm like, what is this stuff here? I had to be a part of what was going down, and I seen something really go haywire. You've been knowing a person for about 20 years. All of a sudden now y'all is into it because of the drugs. You know, now either he want to kill you or you want to kill him. Either it's behind he want to jack you, or he want this neighborhood, or you want the neighborhood. So everybody want to be Scarface. Crips killing Crips, Crips killing Bloods, Bloods killing Bloods, Bloods killing Crips. The thing just went haywire. The drugs came in and had everybody going crazy. It's all negative. You understand what I'm saying? But for any man to get in a car to go and drive by and shoot somebody, that's a coward's move. Because the person that you might be shooting at, the bullet might not hit him. The bullet might just miss and go through somebody's house, kill a baby in the bed or anything.
Drive-bys are one of those mythologies of gang life where everybody seems to think, again, I'm afraid fed by the media, that most gang homicides are drive-bys. They're not. That drive-bys are almost always fatal. They are not. Most of them do not yield death.
While no drive-by statistics were collected in the early 80s, by 1991 they were occurring at an average rate of 4 per day. 2,000 people were shot in those attacks, with less than 10% of those shots proving fatal. Despite the media's focus on drive-by shootings, the fact remains that most of the nearly 800 gang-related homicides charted that year occurred in some other fashion.
The symbolic nature of a drive-by is what captures our attention.
Throughout the 1980s, images and symbols characteristic of modern gang culture solidified.
All gangs have hand signs. By the time you get to know what one of them's hand sign is, it changes something else.
The very first gang sign was done by the Slossons, and they used to throw up a V for Slosson Village. And after they threw up the V, all the other clubs adapted their own hand signs. Real general, if you throw up a C, that means Crip. And if you throw up a B, a variety of ways you can throw up a B, which means blood.
Gang members will throw signs, make a hand sign, add another gang, and then he'll answer back with his, or gunfire. Tattoos generally depict the gang, the person's nickname maybe. and his philosophical bent, whether he be a Crip or Blood. A Crip would have maybe BK, Blood Killer, tattooed on him. A Blood would have CK, Crip Killer, tattooed on him.
Does that mean you're a Crip killer? You ever put any work in for the gang? You shoot anybody that you're a cop to?
No, I'm not violent.
That's where all the kids get to play at this little park right here on the colorful slide with all the markings.
There's a variety of different writing conventions going on in graffiti. First and foremost, the name of the gang. It's about advertising your gang. And then there are symbolic things going on, such as arrows, which mean that this neighborhood is being claimed by that turf, and you'll see arrows pointing down. There's also representation of the dead, sort of commemorating gang members who've died in conflict. Tombstone-like symbols with the names of members written inside them. And in fact, sometimes they'll even tattoo those same things on their bodies.
Alonzo found that graffiti was a good indication of a gang's territory, as warring gangs tended to deface the graffiti of their rivals with greatest frequency at the boundaries of their influence. This wall marks the line between the turf of the Rollin' 30s Crips and the Rollin' 20s Bloods. Crip gangs will often X out the letters B and P, representative of the Piru or blood sets. This is true even when they're writing the P in their own name. Blood sets respond in kind, avoiding the letter C. Every name possesses an inflammatory counterpart. The chicken in this example is a derogatory representation of the kitchen Crips, while the crying toast is an antagonistic pun aimed at the East Coast Crips.
Well, one of the old sayings of it was that it was the newspapers of the streets. We look and see if two gangs haven't been marking each other out, and all of a sudden they're marking each other out. We don't know why, then that there's a problem has developed, because that's a capital offense within the gang world. And I can't tell you how many we found dead at the scene of something like that.
The fights and the disputes and the conflicts are never really over the turf. It's just over the identity of the other organization.
Gang identity is a powerful force, and loyalty is tested in ways designed to separate the homies from the wannabes. This process has given rise to a unique turn of phrase.
If I tell you to put in work, you should know already what I'm talking about. That means you putting in work for the hood. That means get your pistol and go down there and put in work.
That's how gang members become celebrities within the community, by putting in a certain amount of work. And if it results in a homicide, then you really put in work.
The issue of gang cohesiveness is central to my way of thinking about gangs. Once gangs have formed, the question is, why do they maintain themselves? Why do they keep going? And there are several reasons for that. One is that their activities hold them together. That's why they joined in the first place, and they're held together by their own very nature. But also, people start responding to gangs. The neighborhood starts turning its back on those youngsters, and the youngsters feel more alienated. Police crackdowns may take place, giving the gang something to fight against, a kind of common enemy, if you will. So that once the gang is formed, then social responses to the gang kick in and reinforce the very alienation that brought those youngsters into the gang in the first place, reinforcing their bonds to the group, reinforcing gang cohesiveness. That's a very hard thing to avoid. What I would do, if I were a police organization, I had my druthers, would be to put a great deal more money into community development, into prevention efforts early on, rather than trying to handle the problem of the 16, 17, 18-year-old gang member who is already fully committed to that group and not likely to be affected by your suppressive efforts. If you put him away for 3 or 4 or 5 years, he's going to come back. And he's going to come back more hardened, more convinced that nobody loves him, and he's going to respond to that.
Both the news and entertainment media function as agents of gang cohesion. By focusing on violence, it could be argued that the media reward gangs for their sensational behavior.
There was an attraction, particularly in Hollywood and the TV industry, of showing gang members and making them bad guys, but the old Clint Eastwood type of guy, the anti-hero type, and that's not them at all. They're thugs.
We spread the word about gangs through TV, through MTV, through the print media, through movies, and so on. There's not a kid in America, probably an adolescent at least, who doesn't know what a gang member presumably looks like, talks like, acts like, dresses like, what the tattoos are like. So lots of kids across the country sort of imitate that, mimic it to see how it feels. And for some of them, it feels pretty good. It gives them something they haven't had before.
Los Angeles was exporting much more than the gangster culture associated with the Crips and the Bloods. As early as the mid-1980s, law enforcement officials in Seattle and Portland were starting to see Crip sets thriving in their jurisdictions. Street gangs have infiltrated deep into rural America, bringing with them a host of associated problems.
The first sign of us seeing any Crips here in the El Paso area was basically back in '89. And when they came and relocated to El Paso, basically had a huge following from many of our kids because of the fact that they were from California.
Families were getting out of L.A., saying, we're going back home. We didn't have gangs when I was a kid. I'll take you back there and get you out of the gang. And what they did, in fact, was just transport cancer from here to there, because they didn't make that decision till the house had been shot up a few times and we'd arrested the kid a few times for gang stuff. And so now when she moves, he's hardcore. He's not getting out. And that was in just about every case the reason for the initial migration. Then once he gets there, sees that new area, this virgin turf, the police, nobody knows about gangs, then they set up, call some homies back here who go out and help them, and maybe set up a dope network around the surrounding little communities, like an octopus. And pretty soon there's a link between there and here.
For several years, Sergeant McBride has charted where Crip and Blood gangs have appeared across the U.S. His map does not distinguish between transplants, imitators, or drug-selling outposts of Los Angeles gangs. For McBride, it is enough that Raymond Washington's original group of 10 has become a national problem. By 1987, gang violence in Los Angeles had reached epidemic proportions, with homicides occurring at an average rate of more than one a day. In February of 1988, however, Raymond Washington's legacy would break out of its South Central birthplace and onto television screens around the world. 27-year-old Karen Toshima was celebrating a promotion in Westwood, a popular night spot near the UCLA campus. As she walked in a crowd down Broxton Avenue, a member of the Rolling 60s Crips opened fire on a nearby rival. Karen was killed in the crossfire.
The local press played that up very big. One of our local city councilmen offered a reward of $10,000 for information leading to the capture of the shooter. Now, in that same year, there had been hundreds of other shootings, killings by gangs, and no reward had been offered at all.
A city council person named Robert Farrell, who said, unfortunately, there is a perception that a life lost in South Los Angeles in East LA does not measure up to a life lost in Westwood. And that's the way a lot of the residents of South Los Angeles were feeling, because they saw a heightened police presence.
So as soon as a prominent or mainstream person is affected by gang activities, then the rest of us react.
The end result was a renewed effort by law enforcement to suppress gang activity. Chief Daryl Gates received additional funding and manpower for his CRASH program, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums.
There was a time when the Los Angeles Police Department was listening to the outcomes of our research. And Daryl Gates put out an order to all stations in the LAPD, that was Chief Gates at that time, that in the handling of gangs they should be very careful not to do anything that would bring status or identity to the gangs, because this would increase their strength. When the gangs became notably worse during the 1980s, when they became more numerous, more violent, LAPD, along with a lot of other police departments, forgot that message and simply turned to crackdowns, doing more of what they already knew how to do.
I ain't gonna just shoot the whole police force down, because you got good police, you got bad police. But if I'm a Crip, I get dropped off in the Bloods neighborhood, they get on the mic and holler out, we got a Crip. Same thing they do with them, they drop them off in a Crip neighborhood and holler out, we got a Blood. It's sad, because why would you bring somebody in somebody else's community knowing that this was gonna happen?
LAPD operated at one point something called Operation Hammer, which they feel badly about now, but at the time it was a very big thing. 1,000 officer sweep into South Central Los Angeles to pick up as many gang members on a Friday and a Saturday night as they could possibly do.
A war, if we're going to fight a war, must be sustained until you achieve your objective. Our objective is to get rid of the little terrorists that are creating havoc on our streets. We think because of the show of force that crime generally will go down.
Those backfired, essentially. They didn't get many legitimate arrests. They didn't get many felony convictions out of those, but they sure angered an awful lot of people, and they alienated gang members even further than they were alienated against the LAPD to begin with.
At the end of 1988, homicides were at an all-time high, and then it went up again in 1989, the following year. So the efforts to police gangs and police crimes were a big failure.
The perceived enmity between the LAPD and the residents of South Central came to a head when a Simi Valley jury acquitted the police officers charged in the battery of Rodney King. Unlike 1965, however, the 1992 uprising occurred in an area now populated by over 200 well-armed street gangs.
65 didn't settle anything. So when the Rodney King event took place, it triggered off again this remaining residual anti-police feeling in the community and anti-authority feeling in the community.
By the mid-1990s, the Department of Justice estimated that there were over 600,000 gang members nationwide. A quarter of those were in Los Angeles County alone, and 33,000 of them were affiliated with the Crips.
The message today to the Bloods, the Crips, to every criminal gang preying on the innocent is clear. We mean to put you out of business, to break the backs of your organization, to stop you from terrorizing our neighborhoods and our children, to put you away for a very long time. We have just begun the job, and we do not intend to stop until we have finished.
The violence of LA's unrest helped trigger a new wave of federal resources and support. Using conspiracy statutes originally designed to combat the mafia, the FBI formed a special task force to combat street gangs that had reached the next level of criminal enterprise. One of their first targets was a drug trafficking clique within the Grape Street Crips.
Wayne Day was probably the largest. Somewhere along the line, he was dubbed as the godfather of Watts.
It is believed Day expanded his operations across state lines when the LA market for crack became saturated and prices fell. He regularly enlisted younger gang members to ferry narcotics across the country on his behalf.
At the time, a kilogram of cocaine was selling for $14,000 in Los Angeles, but could be sold for $23,000 to $24,000 in Minneapolis or Chicago or Cleveland.
In the end, the Grape Street investigation yielded over 100 indictments nationwide, with 20 convictions in Los Angeles alone. And while the seizures of currency and narcotics were significant, more revealing was the fact that when gang members were threatened with prison, their loyalty to the group disappeared. According to Benavidez, every one of them was willing to give up fellow gang members in exchange for a lighter sentence.
If you think gang banging is the thing, there's only two things going to come out of it. It's death and the penitentiary. So you can have your choice where you want to be.
After his last trip to prison, Greg Batman Davis had had enough. Inspired in part by the memory of Raymond and what the Crips were originally supposed to stand for, Batman dedicated his life to gang prevention and reform. He has produced a video recounting his experiences in hopes that at-risk teenagers might make better choices for their lives. His organization, Save the Babies, has teamed up with Reverend Watkins' Family Helpline in an effort to raise support for a community-based boot camp.
Get them kids from juvenile, get them kids from them broken homes, parents on dope, or they just don't want to pay attention to their parents, put them in that boot camp about 6 months. If you can't break them down in 6 months, then you ain't going to break them down.
The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department already runs boot camps as part of its intervention efforts. Officials were so impressed by the pilot program that they are preparing to try the concept countywide.
Next time their parents see them, it's going to shock them, because they're going to be going back with that yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. At the end of their 6 months, them kids will say, I found somebody that loved me, because they're going to be told every day, only reason why we're doing this is because we love you.
Until the basic causes of gang formation can be dealt with, gangs like Raymond Lee Washington's Crips will continue to proliferate. And while they may dress differently or go by different names, their negative effect on communities will be the same. I'm Robert Stack. Thanks for joining us.